This reading is part of the Nature's Classroom series. This is Lesson 1. Why even bother going outside? What's nature do for us anyway? First, a quote. In every walk with nature, one receives far more than he seeks. John Muir. John Muir, the well-known outdoorsman and naturalist, well known enough that he has a wilderness area named after him in California, knew what he was talking about. Muir seemed to be seeking solace, peace, inspiration, and wonder, as well as good old-fashioned workout when he stepped out into nature. And he didn't just go for little day jaunts. He would set out with minimal gear for days at a time, crossing landscapes that didn't have actual trails through them. Yet, you can learn more about Muir in the link attached to the printed version of this post. Traditional wisdom is the wisdom that's been passed down through the generations, not necessarily because we understood why it works, but because it simply did work. I think there's been a long-standing traditional wisdom that we're healthier when we're outside. Not that it's always sunshine and roses, but that we're better off when we interact with the natural elements on a regular basis, so long as we survive the encounter. I'm absolutely not romanticizing our relationship with nature here. Nature doesn't care about us one way or the other. If anything, nature serves as a weeding out force. Only the good enough, or extremely lucky, and that only lasts so long, survive. But it wasn't until fairly recently that humans developed the technology to separate ourselves from the daily and seasonal rhythms and pressures of nature. Up until then, our species was being sculpted and refined by natural forces no less than the plants and animals that we were struggling to survive with. Those of us who are alive today are the descendants of those who survived. Take a moment to really think about that. Your ancestors were good enough to survive the trials that nature executed. The wheat separated from the chaff. So it wouldn't be hard to infer that if we are the descendants of survivors, it's likely that our ancestors had adaptations. Maybe just minor alterations in their anatomy and physiology that made them better suited to those natural elements. That maybe they even had traits that enhanced their well-being because of some interaction with nature, and that those individuals who weren't able to turn their exposure to nature into a benefit didn't thrive as much. So perhaps our ancestors didn't survive in spite of natural forces, but because of them. Could that be another way to interpret Muir's quote at the beginning of this piece? One of the pitfalls of a scientifically literate, or maybe just scientifically aware, populace is we believe we need evidence, data, proof, before we can accept something as true. John Muir didn't need science to tell him that nature was good for him. He literally felt it in his bones and in his spirit. Nowadays, we call that anecdotal, and that's taken on an almost negative connotation. Today, if someone asks you why they should leave their climate-controlled, cushy, safe, well-lit, air-conditioned, and pest-free indoor space, your argument may fall flat if you just say, because John Muir said so. But you know what's great? All that traditional wisdom that was blindly and correctly accepted for so long now has some modern scientific teeth to it. It just took a while to develop the tech to find it. Keep listening to see some of the ways that we benefit from spending time in nature. Fair warning, I tend to geek out over stuff like this. So if that's not your cup of tea, no judgment. But it's about to get sciencey. The source reference throughout the rest of this post is a book called The Nature Fix: Why Nature Makes Us Happier, Healthier, and More Creative by the author Florence Williams. I also highly recommend the book The Biophilia Effect, a scientific and spiritual exploration of the healing bond between human and nature by the author Clemens G. Arve. Reason 1. Decreased fight or flight mode. Your nervous system has two basic modes: fight or flight, sometimes a third F is added, freeze, and rest and digest. Your fight or flight mode is controlled by the sympathetic nervous system, and your rest and digest mode is controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system. Fight or flight is critical for our survival. It allows us to respond to acute and immediate times of danger or uncertainty. Our blood pressure ramps up to improve circulation to critical structures like your muscles. Your senses become heightened. Your pulse increases to support rapid oxygenation for whatever action you have to take. Adrenaline reduces your sensitivity to pain and might even change your perception of time, possibly by speeding up the rate at which your neurons send signals. In the short term, these changes can be the difference between life and death. Cortisol, the other stress-related hormone that often gets a bad rap, can also be released to help your body deal with longer-term chronic stress. But if this mode is allowed to stay in charge for too long, the body loses its ability to maintain homeostasis. Fight or flight also shuts down your digestive functions because the gut requires a large amount of blood to function. You only have so much blood, and if it's being routed to your muscles and nervous system, there's not a lot left over for digesting. No digestion means no nutrients are being distributed to those very cells that are literally burning through their resources at a faster rate. So fight or flight may allow you to win the battle, but if it never cedes control to the rest and digest mode, your body will ultimately lose the war. Rest and digest is ultimately where you want your body to spend most of its time. And there's something about nature that triggers that change. Assuming you're not being chased by a mountain lion or tumbling down a hill, of course. Oddly, even just pictures of calm nature scenes can be enough to turn rest and digest back on. See Williams, page 26. Blood pressure drops, sometimes as much as 5 to 7%. See Williams, page 63. Cortisol levels decrease. Heart rate and respiration slow. Your brain waves change, and food tastes better. See Williams, page 25. I guess that's why I loved Dinty Moore stew while camping, but wouldn't touch the stuff at home. Takeaway. If you suffer from chronic stress, assess how much time you spend outside versus how much exposure you have to urban stimuli. Even something as simple as a patio garden or a community park could be enough to give permission to your rest and digest mode to take back the reins. Reason 2. Enhanced immune system. It is possible for your immune system to be too enhanced. Just ask anyone with an autoimmune disorder. So we want to be careful about making it seem like strengthening one's immune system is all good with no consequences. However, there are some aspects of your immune system that are positively affected by nature and that are not as likely to cause downstream problems. The highly specialized fighters in the immune system often get a lot of the attention. Your B cells, or antibody-forming cells, and T cells, or foreign body assassins, seek out and destroy specific bad guys. These are the ones that we can train through vaccinations or environmental exposure to antigens. But our immune system also has more generalized protective cells that roam through the body like an everyday security force. One example of these are natural killer cells. They look for cells that have been turned to the dark side, thanks to a virus or cancerous mutation. When a natural killer cell finds a bad cell, they destroy it before it can do more harm. If you're looking for a deeper dive on the immune system components, you can find the link in the printed post. So it would seem like if you're trying to reduce your risk of suffering from a virus or developing cancer, you might be curious how to increase your circulating natural killer cells. Don't worry. Nature's got your back, and your front, and your insides. And it gets to you through your nose. At least that's what some studies out of Korea seem to be showing. See Williams, page 65. The smells of pine trees, and even the forest soil after it rains, seem to be particularly potent triggers of natural killer cells. And the parasympathetic nervous system. Go back to the first item in this list. In one lab study, subjects were exposed to the smell of cypress trees while they slept. Their natural killer cells increased by 20% compared to the control group. No cypress smell while they slept. See Williams, page 29. In another study, people were asked to hike for a couple hours each day for 3 days. After those 3 days, their natural killer cells increased 40% relative to their pre-hike levels. See Williams, page 28. The researchers also found that increase was sustained for a week after the last hike, and to a lesser effect, a month after the last hike. Similar walks through a city environment did not affect the natural killer cells. So it wasn't just the physicality of the hike that increased the natural killer cells. There was something about the type of environment. As with all complex systems, there's likely way more going on here than we currently realize. But it's still so fascinating that our bodies physiologically respond to the sensory stimulation from nature. Another bonus is if you get outside when you're young, your immune system will likely be better trained to recognize friend from foe because of the immense exposure it will get to a wide variety of potential antigens, which could lead to a lower risk for allergies. There's way more to this particular story, like genetic predisposition and whether you were breastfed or not, but it certainly couldn't hurt to get kids outside more, right? Takeaway. If you want a cheap way to boost your body's basic immune function, get outside. Smell the trees. Touch the soil. Listen to water and birdsong and the wind and leaves. Your natural killer cells like it, but those virus-infected and precancerous cells won't. Reason 3. Increased mental health and creativity. I always knew I was happier in nature. I also did some of my best writing there. I just figured that was my personality. But it turns out human brains are wired to respond to nature. I guess I'm not special after all. The mind and body are inextricably linked. They affect each other for better or worse. Physiological stress can certainly affect your mental state, and your mental state can certainly affect your physical body. And we've already established that natural stimuli can reduce physiological stress. So perhaps nature is assisting your mental health by just reducing stress. Or maybe it's just because you're out of your normal elements, away from the stimuli that would normally remind you of your responsibilities. Dishes and laundry, I'm looking at you. Or perhaps there are other interactions at work. There's still a lot of research going on here because understanding how the brain works is very much a work in progress. But given the rates of mental health decline in modern society, and the profits pharmaceutical companies are making off that decline, wouldn't it be nice if we could mitigate some of those issues by just getting outside? In one lab study, subjects' brainwaves were measured when they looked at nature scenes versus pictures of human architecture. Nature scenes elicited a brain activity pattern known as alpha waves, which indicate relaxation and are also correlated with higher serotonin levels. Happy brain hormones. The architecture scenes did not have this result on the brain. See Williams, page 26. In another study, subjects were asked to find the association between three seemingly unrelated words. After spending several days in nature as part of a structured outdoors experience, their ability to find the association between the sets of words improved by 50%. See Williams, page 37. Can you say solution to writer's block? Williams explores several possible mechanisms for how nature affects us. One is the speed at which we move through nature versus our normal day-to-day life. We evolved to move at the speed of nature, but modern life seems to be go, 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 and we find ourselves overbooked and rushing from one obligation to another. Being in nature gives us the freedom to slow back down, to move at the speed we evolved at without the novel stimulations of modern life. Another is what part of the brain we activate when we're in nature. The prefrontal cortex is unique to mammals and particularly well developed in humans. It's what allows us abstract thought and higher order thinking, aka executive function. It's also what allows us to perseverate on unproductive thought spirals. Being in nature seems to quiet or deprioritize this part of the brain and amplify the parts that focus on spatial and sensory input, as well as unstructured thought, aka daydreaming. Our brains become more present and attuned to the now. See Williams, page 48. Takeaway. If you need a mental refresh, either to give your unproductive thoughts a break or to inspire new ideas, go outside. Or at the very least, look at nature pictures and listen to nature sounds. Did I mention that I publish soundscapes like the one linked into this post? Your brainwaves will thank you with increased serotonin and dopamine. And if you happen to get a little exercise in with a hike, all the better. This list is just the tip of the pine tree. I'm partial to forests. What can I say? I highly encourage you to explore this topic in more detail by either checking out the 2 books I mentioned at the start of this list or by doing your own research, preferably while sitting outside. So make like John Muir and go for a walk. Regardless of what you seek along the way, you will receive a more rested nervous system, a more effective immune system, and a better state of mind. Oh, and another thing, you'll sleep better. Trust me, what could it hurt? I mean, so long as you don't get stung by a bee or hit by lightning or trip on a rock or, well, I should probably stop before I talk you out of it, huh? Thank you for listening to this audio version of Reasons to Go Outside, or lesson 1, why even bother going outside. If you click into the post, I'd love to see your comments about what you thought about these benefits, what else you know about why we should get outside, and just to add to my little community that I'm building at my Substack. If this was a pleasant experience for you, I encourage you to subscribe or follow my Substack and become part of this community. Thanks for listening, and get outside.